No, yes. Any particular pages or anything?
Your Honor, I actually, if I could, I folded it back over. I could point the court directly to it. Underlined. Okay.
To Chico. CICCIO.
There's analysis prior to that, but that's the ultimate conclusion of the judgment.
Let me just get it if I may. Pages 19 and 25 there.
So he did not, in fact, testify, and the judge strike his evidence, or not allow him to testify at a trial. This was an affidavit submitted in connection with a new trial motion.
No, it was testimony at the hearing that
Right,
was
but
excluded.
a new trial hearing.
It wasn't just an affidavit, though, Your Honor. It was actual testimony that was ultimately excluded in the decision on the motion for new trial.
Right. But so the issue was...
That it's not scientifically reliable,
Right.
according to the court.
The issue is what, given the standard that the defendant has to basically show that a new trial is warranted, that Judge Gottmeier chose not to credit his opinion, and the SJC affirmed her.
Aside from Mr. Carita's own testimony, there's no evidence to establish that his opinion was generally accepted by the relevant scientific community or otherwise sufficiently reliable. He cited to no scientific authority in either his affidavit or his hearing testimony to support his ultimate conclusion, instead relying solely on his judgment and expertise, which is obviously not the scientific standard. That's what the SJC determined.
And Your Honor, if he had rendered an opinion, that might be relevant, but I've asked for no opinion, he's rendered none.
Well,
He's rendered no opinion in this case. He's come in and said, I swabbed. He's not rendered an opinion to a scientific degree of certainty. His questioning, his expert ability to do that was questioned on this DNA. But here, he's not rendered any opinion.
Well, that's true, but the defendant has tried to turn him into some sort of DNA expert. We
But
had...
they haven't asked him a DNA
All I've done, Your Honor,
opinion question.
I've just tried to turn him into a swabber, someone who knows how to swab, and that's what he is.
But they've unfairly allowed him to portray himself about his experience in the courts. They elicited the testimony, how many times he's testified, how many times for the prosecution, how many times for the defendant, how many opinions he's rendered, how many times he's testified in Massachusetts, in New York, in Connecticut. All of those things they elicited.
That goes to bias, and not, that goes to bias, how
here,
many
Your
times
Honor,
he testified. This is whether...
In DeChico, he was working at the Connecticut lab. He testified, I believe, in 2010 in his role as a forensic consultant. He was the second expert retained by that particular defendant because after the first, the item was sent to the State Police Lab and to Cellmark. Both the State Police Lab and Cellmark agreed, and ultimately the first expert agreed in that case that the defendant, there was no evidence that was scientifically reliable. Mr. Carita was then brought in as a consultant during his time at the Connecticut lab. He attempted to provide testimony to the court that the court ultimately deemed essentially other than his own, as the SJC found, his own belief that he could do it. There was no scientific reliability to it. The defendant has placed all of these things in front of the jury about Mr. Carita's history. The Commonwealth didn't do that, and it directly contradicts, in large part, his aura of expertise that the defendant has tried to elicit from him.
Your Honor, I've asked him to elicit no opinion. He was retained for an extremely limited purpose. I simply wanted to establish his background, that he is who he says he is. He doesn't have any bias toward the defense, and this case does not in any way, shape, or form implicate whether or not he swabbed this evidence in an appropriate fashion and an objective fashion, and it is simply an effort to smear somebody with something that's totally extraneous and totally off point, and it should not be permitted, Your Honor.
Given the issue in the other case was an opinion on potential alleles and interpreting results, and that Mr. Carita's opinion was based on peaks identified as alleles in the context of limited data, and the court found under the Dober-Lanigan standard it wasn't using the gatekeeper function, it wasn't sufficiently reliable to go to the jury. The SJC reasserts that the court was using its gatekeeper role under Dober-Lanigan. All of this may be relevant, have been relevant, had this witness come in to express an opinion in the DNA area, his expertise in interpreting DNA results or in how much data you need to get a DNA result. But given the fact that no opinion was elicited, I find that the Commonwealth is not allowed to impeach him with the statements in the SJC opinion or in Judge Kampmeyer's decision. You can bring the jury back, please.
Your Honor, I'd ask you to strike the portions of his testimony where the defendant has then been able to put in uncontested that he's been allowed to render his opinions. That's the defendant asked him. And this is in direct contradiction to that. And I'd ask you, if we're not allowed to cross-examine him about that, then I'd ask you to strike that testimony.
Well, Your Honor, he was allowed to present an opinion. It's just that Judge Kampmeyer, under the role as gatekeeper, chose not to credit it.
Right, this was not in a trial function. So this was whether a new trial motion for new trial should be allowed.
Totally
so we don't
standard,
have a situation. He did testify. She found that that there was no reason to grant a new trial because he would not have been allowed to testify. So it is not a situation where he was in court testifying and his testimony was stricken, or after a hearing,
She
Judge
found
ruled.
his opinion unreliable.
I understand that, and in this case, he has rendered absolutely no opinion. You may bring the jury
But the
back.
jury is left with the impression that the court always finds his opinion to be reliable.
I don't think there's been any indication one way or other as to whether any of the Commonwealth's experts who testified or any expert testified here, whether anybody, a judge or a jury, ever found any of those opinions credible. There's certainly been no indication, I think, with respect to any witness, that a judge has made a determination on any of them, or a jury, as to whether the opinion was credible. This is not a credibility. This is a Dober-Lanigan test, and the court found that it wasn't sufficiently reliable to go to the jury, but not in a trial context, that there was no reason to grant a new trial because he would not have been allowed to testify.
Because it wasn't scientifically reliable. The court
Exactly.
allowed Daniel Pratt to be cross-examined about something that he had nothing to do with in this case.
Well, Your Honor,
Let the witness understand.
I would like the witness to understand, and like the jury brought back in.
the Pratt thing is basically what Mr. Bomber just did about the lab not being accredited, and I didn't have any objection to that.
It's not the same.
You may bring the jury down, please. Right this way, sir? All right. Order the session, be seated.
Now, when you met, that was January 13th in Connecticut, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
And about how many days of lead time did you have to prepare for that meeting?
Very few, I think a couple.
How many is a couple, please?
One or two, somewhere around there.
And it's fair to say that that all took place indoors, right?
Correct.
With a couple of days warning, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you'd agree with me it took over an hour to perform that procedure that you've just described to the jurors?
Correct.
In fact, somewhat well in excess of an hour, is that correct?
Yeah.
And it's fair to say that part of the reason was that there were a number of things that you needed that you didn't have at that time, is that correct?
Correct.
And so you had to leave on occasion and go get those things? True?
Correct. Or have someone bring them to me.
And even then, when things were brought, they didn't comply with the requirements, and things had to be further searched out and obtained, is that correct?
Yep.
And so that period of time, all of that, you had forewarning, it wasn't about to rain inside of that building, true?
As far as I know, yes.
And it took well in excess of an hour to swab a single piece of gum.
Yes.
If I can approach, please, Your Honor. If I may, Your Honor. I'll show you exhibit number 169.
Yes.
Do you recognize that? Have you ever seen that before?
No.
Okay. Just ask you, does this indicate that it is a receipt from Blue Hill Express, 2740 Washington Street in Canton, Mass?
Yes.
June 17th at 2:20 a.m., is that correct?
Correct.
And it indicates here in the first item, bubble yum, cotton, 99 cents. Is that correct?
That's what it says, yes.
Okay, do you recognize what this is?
That is bubble yum cotton candy, but a bubble gum.
And I'm going to offer this bubble yum package as an exhibit, please.
Understand. No objection.
That's the next exhibit.
Are you familiar with bubble yum cotton candy gum?
No, I don't chew gum.
Okay. Did you, in viewing the item, could you tell whether or not that was cotton candy gum?
No,
You couldn't. You couldn't? Is that correct?
that is correct.
You swabbed it, and that was the end of your role in this?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Mr. Carita, you indicated on cross-examination that you conducted some private forensic consulting while you were working at the Connecticut State Lab, right?
Yes,
Okay. And in Connecticut, is it allowed for employees of the Connecticut State Forensic Lab to, in addition to their work in that lab, to carry out private consulting in other cases?
yes, as long as they were not within the state of Connecticut and there was a conflict of interest. Years before I had gotten there, it had been allowed.
And was it allowed while you were there?
Yes,
And did your colleagues do it as well as you?
yes,
Now, and you indicated that you're aware from your experience that in Massachusetts, that's not the case, right?
that is correct.
But it is the case in Connecticut, right?
Yes,
And that's where you worked and lived, Connecticut, right?
correct.
Okay. Now, recall Mr. Baumberg asked you about whether or not you received police reports, right?
Correct.
Okay. Were you retained in this case solely for the purpose of conducting swabbing, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And did you need police reports to do that, Mr. Carita?
No.
Okay. Now, finally, you recall my name came up during cross-examination, sir?
I do.
Okay. And Mr. Baumberg asked you some questions about when defense counsel, including me, had an opportunity to look at some of this evidence, right?
Correct.
Okay, you weren't there when that happened, right?
No, I was not.
That was before you had ever gotten a call about this case, right?
I object to the form of the question, Your Honor.
Well, in any event, were you there when that occurred?
I object.
Were you there when that occurred?
No.
Okay. And were you aware that there were two state troopers there throughout that evidence inspection?
I am not aware.
Okay. Were you aware that Trooper Giordino was there during the evidence inspection?
Sustained the form of question, you may ask him what he was aware of.
Were you aware, did you ever have occasion to see the report that Trooper Giordino wrote about the inspection of evidence on that occasion, Mr. Carita?
I object.
The rule.
I don't recall.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
May.
Showing your document, drawing your attention to it. particularly the bottom of the first page. Did you ever have occasion to see that report, Mr. Carita?
May I take a second to review it?
Please.
My apologies. Yes, I do.
You seen that report before?
Yes, I don't know about
The cover sheet?
the cover sheet, but yes,
You seen the substance of it?
yes.
Are you aware that the evidence that day was only handled by persons who had gloves on?
I object.
Could I see counsel?
Sir, are you aware whether or not the evidence was handled only by persons who had gloves on that day?
I object.
In the form of the question.
What, if anything, are you aware of whether gloves were worn by persons who handled the evidence that day?
I am unaware of anything concerning that.
You weren't there.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
So when you indicated to Mr. Sultan that you didn't get any reports, that's apparently not correct. You've reviewed that report, apparently, was what you just told us.
Yes.
Okay, so you did get reports from Mr. Sultan, correct?
Yes, I was more interpreting as scenario reports, not...
The question was whether or not you got any police reports, true?
Well then, yes, let me correct myself. I did also receive that report, but also a report from the Massachusetts State Police Forensic Lab as well. So yes, I did receive reports from the Massachusetts State Police. My apologies, I misinterpreted. I was thinking of different types of reports, scene reports, stuff like that.
And in your entire time as a forensic person, you want those police reports, isn't that correct? That's on your request for discovery.
Yes, that is correct.
All of them. True.
I usually like to see all of them, yes.
Nothing further.
You need them to do a swabbing?
No, I do not.
You may sit down.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
Your Honor, the defendant calls Jennifer Smith, please. She may be in that room just to the right.
Right this way, ma'am. Please follow me. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Ma'am, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to this court and this jury will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Have a seat, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Would you state your name, please,
My name is Jennifer Smith
and where you live?
in Dallas, Texas.
What is your current employment?
I'm currently employed with Cellmark Forensics and as a senior forensic DNA analyst.
Can you tell us what is Cellmark Forensics, please?
We are an accredited private DNA testing lab. We contract out with a lot of local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. In fact, the Massachusetts State Police is one of our clients. We also contract out with private clients as well as defendants.
Can you tell us what your educational background is, please?
Yes. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology, and I received that from Cameron University, which is located in Lawton, Oklahoma. I then obtained my Master's of Science in Criminal Justice with a specialization in forensic science, and that I received from the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Following that, I underwent a 10-month-long formal documented training program through the Virginia Institute of Forensic Science and Medicine, where I've learned the techniques and procedures that I currently employ today.
And when did you obtain your master's degree, please?
In 1997.
Can you please tell us, in summary fashion, your employment history since obtaining your master's in science?
I was employed with the Virginia Department of Forensic Science from 1999 until 2008. At that time, I moved to Dallas, Texas, and I obtained employment with Cellmark Forensics.
Now, when you were with the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, that was about a 10-year period, 99 to 2008?
Just under, yes.
Tell us what you did, please, when you were there.
I initially started out as a laboratory technician, and that's when I was undergoing my fellowship. But then in July of 2000, I received my full qualification as a forensic DNA analyst. And up until the end of my employment in 2008, I continued to do that.
And tell us, what is the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, please?
It is a part of the state crime laboratory system, much like MSP has, or the Massachusetts State Police crime lab system has.
So it's essentially a law enforcement laboratory, is that correct?
It is. It's under the state.
And you told us that you moved to Texas and went to work for Cellmark in 2008, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And tell us, please, what have you done at Cellmark since 2008?
I've done the exact same thing. I've been a qualified forensic DNA analyst where I've examined multiple types of cases and performed DNA testing on them, prepared written reports, and testified in court when asked.
Now, do you have to take any proficiency tests on a regular basis?
Yes, in order for our laboratory to maintain our accreditation, every qualified analyst must undergo 2 proficiency tests a year. And since I was qualified in 2000, every year I've completed them successfully.
Have you testified as a DNA expert in court before?
I have. I've testified in local and state jurisdictions from probably at least 6 to 8 states across the country, approximately 50 times.
And about how many of those 50 times you've testified have been in criminal cases?
I would say 99% of them.
Okay. And in the cases in which you've testified in, have you testified in some cases for the prosecution and in some cases for the defense?
Yes, for both.
Now, in this case, was Cellmark retained by the defense to perform some testing at some point?
Well, it was my understanding in the beginning that I was retained by Mr. Eric Carita, who had made submissions, I believe, upon your behalf.
Okay. And Mr. Carita, did you understand Mr. Carita was working with the defense in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And did Cellmark receive a communication from Mr. Carita at some point in mid-January seeking some testing in connection with this case?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And thereafter, was there some paperwork filled out by Mr. Carita that was submitted to Cellmark in accordance with your protocol so that testing could take place?
Yes.
Okay. And specifically, can you tell us what Mr. Carita asked Cellmark to do in connection with this case?
It's the same.
Okay. Well, what was Cellmark employed to do in this case?
To perform examinations, one, first a screening test for the presence of amylase, and then perform DNA testing on 2 swabs that were received by our laboratory.
Okay. And you mentioned amylase. What is amylase?
Amylase is an enzyme or a component found in saliva. It's the enzyme that gives us the ability to help break down and digest our food. It's most abundantly found in saliva, but it's also found in other body fluids as well.
And when you say Cellmark was retained to do amylase testing on what?
It's a presumptive test or a screening tool that we use.
Okay. And was that also in connection with the same swabbings that you were sent?
Yes, we were
Okay.
supposed to perform that on the swabs.
Okay. So am I correct that you were asked to do both amylase testing and DNA testing on those swabs?
Yes.
Okay. And in addition to, and when you say DNA testing, tell us what exactly, why don't you describe the process of DNA testing?
DNA testing can be broken down fairly simply into 4 stages. We have the first phase, which is called the extraction phase, and that's where we attempt to extract or remove any of the DNA from the sample that we were given. The second phase would be DNA quantitation. That's where we measure how much DNA is or is not present in that sample. And then the third step is the amplification, where we make millions and millions of copies of that very small amount of DNA that we first received. And then the fourth and final step is the detection step, where we run this amplified or copied DNA through a detection instrument, which allows us to be able to determine what DNA types are present in that sample.
Okay. And once you determine, if you're able to determine the DNA profile in a particular piece of evidence, can that DNA profile be compared to other known DNA profiles?
Yes, it can.
Okay. And did that happen at some point in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, at the end of your DNA testing process, whose known DNA profile did you compare your results to?
I was provided the profile obtained through the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratories report, and that was it was labeled as being from Aaron J. Hernandez.
Okay. Now, did this particular, Cellmark's a big operation, right?
Fairly large, yes.
Okay. And did somebody assign you this particular case?
Yes, I was assigned by my immediate supervisor.
Okay. Did Mr. Carita have anything to do with assigning you to the case?
No, it did not.
Okay. Did defense counsel have anything to do with assigning you to this case?
No.
Okay. Have you ever worked with me before?
No, I have not.
Have you ever worked with Mr. Rankin or Mr. Fee before?
No.
Were you provided, you know what I mean by extraneous information?
Yes.
Okay, what do I mean by extraneous information?
Extraneous could be small bits of information that may or may not be relevant to a particular item at hand.
Okay. And were you provided police reports about the investigation in this case before you did your testing?
No, I had no prior knowledge of any of the circumstances surrounding anything related to my testing.
Okay. And do you need that kind of information to do your testing?
Not always, no.
Okay. And in fact, in your opinion, is it helpful or unhelpful for you to have extraneous information when you conduct your testing?
Often it can be helpful to actually not have it if your intention is to eliminate any type of bias in the case. There are also other cases where it is necessary to have some information so we know what to look at first and how to proceed with certain items.
Did you feel that you needed any extraneous information about this case in order to conduct the testing on those swabbings that you were asked to do?
No, I did not. The testing was pretty upfront, fairly simple. I needed to screen for amylase, and then I needed to perform DNA testing. It was quite simple.
Okay. Now, at some point on or about January 14th of 2015, did Cellmark receive a FedEx package from Mr. Carita?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And when that package was received, did you open it or did someone else open it?
Any evidence that comes into our laboratory is received by our evidence custodians. They'll log in the evidence, assign it a unique laboratory case identification number, and then they'll make any necessary notes that they need to, and then they'll also initiate the formal chain of custody on that item we received.
Okay. And what was inside the package that was received from Mr. Carita on or about January 14th, 2015?
The inside was a swab wrapper package which contained the 2 swabs.
Okay. And did the two swabs differ from one another in any way?
Yes, they did. One had a darker blue staining, and it had a hash mark, like a single hash mark on the wooden stick. The second swab had 2 hash marks, and it was a lighter blue staining.
Okay. And based on your experience as a forensic examiner, did you draw any conclusions from the different hash marks and different coloration on those 2 swabs?
I was uncertain, so after that day I had a conversation with Mr. Carita to inquire about the swabs, because there was also the, I didn't want to consume any material unnecessarily. I only wanted to take...
I don't want you to tell us about the substance of that conversation, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry?
Okay. And after you had that conversation, did you commence your testing?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And tell us, and you went through the steps that you told us about?
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to amylase, tell us about the amylase testing. How did you do that?
The amylase test, it operates much in the same way a pregnancy test was. You have your test cartridge, and inside of it you have the test strip and a little window. And if you see a line appear, then that indicates you're potentially pregnant. If a line doesn't appear, it indicates you're not. Amylase is very much the same. It has a cassette with the test strip inside. I removed a portion of the swab, placed it into a solution to remove any of the sample that was present on that swab. I then took a portion of that solution, loaded it into the test well on my cassette, and much like a paper towel would absorb water, the test strip absorbed this solution. And once it was fully absorbed on the cassette, I noticed the presence of a line, which indicated to me that amylase was in fact present.
Okay. And the presence of amylase, what if anything does that signify?
The presence of amylase is indicative of the possible presence of saliva.
Okay. And beyond being possible, is there anything else that the presence of amylase says about the likely or unlikeliness of the presence of saliva?
Given the type of test that we use, the type of cassette and the manufacturer that we use, they heavily or strongly suggest that any amylase test is positive. However, in my opinion, as well as in some other people's opinions, I believe we don't consider it 100% confirmatory, but it does highly suggest that it is saliva.
Okay. Now, after you did the amylase testing, did you do the DNA testing?
I did.
Okay. And why don't you go through the steps that you went through with these particular swabbings in order to ultimately see if you could generate a DNA profile from the evidence?
Well, the portion of the swab I removed for amylase was combined with the remainder of that same swab that I took it from to begin with. Then that was placed in a uniquely labeled tube with a barcode, and that sample was tracked through all of those 4 steps that I spoke about: extraction, quantitation, amplification, and detection. At that point, through the use of a computer software program, I analyzed the data, determined what the DNA profile was for that swab, and I was able to make some conclusions with regards to that profile.
Okay. Now, when you test a piece of evidence for DNA, are you always able to obtain, is there DNA in all the evidence you test?
No, there's not.
Okay, so sometimes you get nothing at all, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And are there occasions where you are able to get only a partial profile when you test evidence for DNA?
Yes, and that most often occurs when there's very little DNA present to begin with.
Okay. And when you're talking about a DNA profile, what exactly do you mean by that?
The DNA profile is a way that you can uniquely identify individuals, except with the absence of in the absence of identical twins, that is, because identical twins will have the exact same DNA profile. It allows us to compare known persons to items of evidence and the profiles that we obtain from them. And from that, we can conclude whether a particular individual could or could not have been a donor of the DNA on the evidence.
And does it involve comparing, how is a profile, in other words, when you say profile, what specifically is meant by the term DNA profile?
The DNA profile that I'm specifically referring to is 16 different genetic markers or areas along our DNA. Along with those 15 unique markers is one that's called amylogenin, which is the sex-determining locus, and that essentially tells me whether it's a male or a female that's present in this sample.
Okay, so other than the male-female determination, is it correct that there are 15 specific spots on the DNA molecule that you're testing is designed to look for what's at those 15 spots?
Yes.
Okay. And is that same testing methodology, looking at those same 15 spots, employed in forensic DNA testing throughout the United States?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in fact, is there a database named CODIS, which is a national database of millions of profiles of individuals, all involving the same 15 spots on the DNA molecule?
I object.
Staying from the question.
Do you know what CODIS is?
I do.
What is CODIS?
CODIS stands for the Combined DNA Index System. What it is it's comprised of, as you said, many samples for a variety of different types of databases. It's what allows states to potentially obtain data bank hits when crimes are committed in one state, but perhaps an individual has been found in another. States also employ their own state databases from which we can search evidence profiles, as well as some states have local databases as well.
Your Honor, would this be an all right time to break? Or not?
I was actually planning to go to 1:30 if we
Okay.
could do that today, because the lunches, I've been told, are not going to be here till then.
Very well, Your Honor. Now, in this particular case, with this particular evidence swab that you tested, were you able to generate a full DNA profile at all 15 of those spots?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And is there a more technical name for those spots other than spots? What are they called?
Technically, we refer to them as each individual area is a locus, but all of them together we refer to as loci.
Okay, so loci, that's L-O-C-I?
Yes.
And that's the plural of locus, L-U-C-L-O-C-U-S?
Yes.
Okay. And you said one of the stages that you talked about in the testing process is quantitation?
Yes.
And what is that stage for, please?
That was where we measure the amount of DNA that's present in the sample.
Okay. And why do you do that?
Because when we perform the next phase, which is amplification, we shoot for a certain target amount of DNA. So we want to make sure that if we have too much, we dilute it down, or if we don't have enough and we don't quite have enough to reach our target, we can concentrate the sample down so that we will have more DNA to work with.
And with respect to this swab, did you have enough DNA to proceed with your testing?
Yes, I had more than enough.
Okay. And so you told us you were able to obtain a full profile at all 15 loci?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And after you obtained that full profile at all 15 loci, did you compare that profile to the profile you told us about earlier?
I did, but what I first needed to conclude was I needed to look at the profile and see what my results actually were. What I was able to determine across all 15 loci, there was a single major male predominant profile. At 3 of those loci, I had a single additional allele. I wasn't able to draw any conclusions on these 3 extraneous alleles, but it was quite clear that it was a single major male donor on that item of evidence.
Okay. So once you determined that you had a single major male donor or contributor, did you then actually detail on some kind of a chart what the profile was for that single major male contributor?
It is in the chart, which is part of the report, which I wrote and provided.
Okay. And does the chart list the individual's markers at each of those 15 loci?
It does.
Okay. And then after you determined that profile from the DNA and the swab at each of those 15 loci, did you then compare that profile to a known person's profile?
I did.
Okay. And tell us again who that known person was.
Aaron Hernandez.
Okay. Can we see the sidebar here? Smith, we're showing you a document. Do you recognize what that document is?
I do. I recognize.
What do you recognize it to be?
I recognize it to be the DNA typing results chart, which was a part of my reported laboratory examination I created on January 19th of 2015. And I also recognize it by our unique Cellmark Forensics case number, as well as the agency case number that was on the submission form.
And just in a general way, tell us what kind of information is present on that chart, please.
This provides all the DNA types which were obtained from both the swab and that from Mr. Aaron Hernandez, and it's all the DNA types obtained for each of those samples at all 15 loci.
Thank you. I'd ask this to be marked for identification and uses of chalk, please.
Mark for identification.
Triple D biology.
Show you what's triple D for education. I think we'll do it in pieces. So let's start with the upper left, where I'm pointing this line across. Can you just tell us what is that? What's on that line in this chart?
Those are the sample names, the first being the swab from the gum-like substance. Below that is our case number and its unique item number that was associated with it. And then below that is the actual agency case number that was assigned, and it was listed on the submission form.
Okay. So actually, before we get to that line, there's a line above, and what is the line above listed across this chart?
Those are the 15 loci plus amylogenin, and those are simply those are the areas along the DNA that we were looking at, and those are simply represented by abbreviation. So you'll see D8S 1179 and et cetera as we go through.
So that first box, D8S 1179. What does that mean?
That's just an abbreviation for where on the chromosome that location was found.
Okay, so that's one spot or locus on the DNA molecule.
Yes, it's one of our markers of interest.
Okay, that's one of the 15?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we're not going to do this all 15, but let's go to the next one. CSF1PO, what does that mean?
Again, it's just an abbreviation for the location located along the chromosome.
Okay, and then this chart lists all 15 all the way across?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next, so the next line up, the next row across, you said it lists the, what you were testing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then under each of these loci, it gives some numbers, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the first one, the numbers, what are the numbers under the first one?
An 11 and a 14.
Okay, and what does that mean?
DNA is inherited from both your mother and father. So you're going to receive one copy of your DNA from your mother and the other copy from your father. Sometimes they'll be different, sometimes they'll be the same. Here, it was evident that an 11 DNA type was donated from one individual and a 14 was donated from the other.
Okay. And so the next one, you said that in addition to identifying a major male contributor, there were several extraneous alleles, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the next row over there, that's the next locus, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and what are the numbers that you found at that spot on the DNA molecule?
Well, the fact that there were 3 different numbers represented told me that this was a mixture profile, meaning there was more than one individual who was the source of the DNA present.
Okay, so you know because there are 3 that there's something else besides the major contributor?
Yes.
Right? Okay. And let's just go, just do a couple more. Next one. A10?
Yes, again, and these were both contributed by the major donor, so this is telling me that one of those alleles or DNA types was donated from the mother and the other was donated from the father.
Next one.
Same with CSF, just there's a 10 and a 12, both which were identified as having come from the major donor.
The next one, you only got one number, right?
That's true.
So what does that mean?
Well, that tells me, again, I was able to correlate this DNA type as having come from the major donor of this profile. What that's telling me is that that major donor received both a 16 from his mother, or his or her, and a 16 from the father.
Okay, so the same, at that spot, you got the same DNA marker from both counts?
Yes.
Okay. And this just goes all the way across the same way, right?
Yes.
Listing what you found at every locus,
Yes,
right?
correct.
Okay, on that swab, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we'll go to the next line. And what is reflected on the next one?
Here we have the profile which I received from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratories report. This is for Aaron J. Hernandez, and below that is the MSP's case number along with their unique identifier for that item.
Okay. So let's go across. So the first location, or locus, what did you get from the swabbing?
An 1114.
And what was Mr. Hernandez's profile at that spot?
An 1114 as well.
Okay. Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
This was the one that indicated to me a possible mixture.
Yeah.
The 30 and the 32.2 I was able to conclude came from the major donor, and this 31.2 was one of these minor additional alleles that I couldn't make any conclusions upon.
Okay. Next one, what did you get from the, what did you get from the swabbing?
An 810 on the swabbing
What
and
about Mr. Hernandez?
the same, an 810.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
A 1012,
What did you get from Mr. Hernandez?
1012.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
16,
What did you get from Mr. Hernandez?
a 16.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
Well, I had already previously determined that the 9 and the 9.3 came from the major profile, or from the major donor. That 7 was another one of those minor alleles that I couldn't make any conclusions about. And that was the same as Mr. Hernandez, who was a 9, 9.3.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
1213,
What did you get from Mr. Hernandez?
1213.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
1112,
And from Mr. Hernandez?
1112.
Next one, swabbing,
1925,
and Mr. Hernandez?
1925.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
12.2,
And from Mr. Hernandez?
or sorry, 12.2 and a 13, excuse me. And Hernandez, Mr. Hernandez had a 12.2 and a 13 as well.
Same.
Yes.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
A 14 and an 18,
And what did you get from Mr. Hernandez?
14, 18.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
An 11,
And from Mr. Hernandez?
11.
Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
14, 18,
And from Mr. Hernandez?
14, 18.
Now, this next one, tell us what this next one represents, please.
This was the sex determining locus known as amylogenin, which is going to tell me whether there's a male or a female present. Males are represented by XYs, females are represented by an X. It was clear to me here that the major donor was an XY, making it a male.
Okay, so the swabbing was a male XY,
Yes,
and Mr. Hernandez?
is a male XY.
Okay. Next one, what did you get from the swabbing?
This was the third area that I mentioned where I was able to determine a major donor with one single minor allele. The major donor was a 912, and Mr. Hernandez is a 912.
And last one, swabbing?
2123, and Mr. Hernandez is the 2123.
So after comparing the full profile at 15 loci plus the gender determination on the swabbing with the full profile plus the gender determination for Mr. Hernandez, what conclusions, if any, did you draw?
I was able to conclude that the major donor on the swab of the gum-like substance matched the DNA profile of Mr. Hernandez at the 15 areas we tested.
Okay. And after making that determination, did you perform a statistical calculation of random match probability on that major profile?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And explain to us, please, what is meant by random match probability?
Random match probability asks the question, what's the chance or likelihood of going out at random in the entire world's population and finding this profile again? So when we calculated the statistics on the major male donor, if I could I please refer to my report?
Sure.
We were able to determine statistically that the frequency occurrence of that major male donor profile.
Are you finished explaining what is meant by random match probability?
Sure, it was the odds or the chance of going out and finding that same evidence profile at random in the world's population.
Okay.
So how often would this happen?
Okay. And is that calculation in your field normally done with reference to different...
While the frequencies are going to differ slightly amongst populations, for the most part they're going to be fairly similar. But just to be more thorough and to provide something that's, I guess, not more exact, but just to provide a better likelihood or probability, they do prefer to break it down amongst all the different populations.
Okay. And you performed those calculations in this case?
Yes.
Okay. With respect, and what were the 5 ethnic groups that you used in your statistical calculations? Tell us just the groups. What are the names of the groups?
They are the Black, the Caucasian, the Southwest Hispanic, the Southeast Hispanic, and the general Asian population.
Okay. And what was the first of those groups you named?
Black.
Okay. So with respect to that particular group, tell us what was your statistical calculation of the random match probability that these profiles would, that the profile would match somebody in the, taken at random from the population?
The odds are 1 in 428 quintillion unrelated individuals.
Okay. And this quintillion is a number with a lot of zeros after it?
It is. To put it in a better frame of reference, the world population is approximately 6.7. From billion...
6.7 what?
6.7 billion. You go from billion to trillion, so that's 1,000 times a billion. From a trillion, if you're multiplying a trillion times 1,000 to get to quadrillion. To get to quintillion, you're multiplying quadrillion by another 1,000. So as you can see, the numbers are exponentially larger than the actual world population itself.
Okay. And just, why don't you tell us the calculation, the random match calculation that you made with respect to the other 4 ethnic groups that you looked at?
In the Caucasian, the frequency of occurrence was 1 in 25.38 quintillion. Southwest Hispanic was 1 in 154.7 quintillion unrelated individuals. Southeast Hispanic, its occurrence would be approximately 1 in 41.13 quadrillion unrelated individuals. And the general Asian, the occurrence would occur approximately 1 in 10.40 quadrillion unrelated individuals.
Is that a moment you're on to find an exhibit? Sorry, Ronnie. One-third, yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize, I'll come. Thank you, thank you, Eddie. Now, Ms. Smith, does DNA transfer from one surface to another?
It can, yes.
And can you explain to us how that happens?
DNA is present in all of our body fluids as well as our skin cells. So anything that, say we were to sneeze upon or anything that we might touch, we're essentially placing our DNA onto that particular object. This is what's known as primary transfer. DNA is moving from one object to another. What can also occur is what's called secondary transfer. That's when item is placed on one object and then subsequently moved on to a second object. A good example of this would be, because we're always sloughing off our skin cells, and say you shake hands with someone, give a firm handshake, and maybe your hand's a little sweaty. You might be transferring some of your DNA onto that other person's hand. Now, when they go to sit down at their desk later in the office and they pick up their cup of coffee that they go to drink every day, if someone were to come along and swab that coffee cup, we might actually be able to detect your DNA because that individual had it on their hand possibly. So that's what's known by secondary transfer. It's actually transferring 2 times.
From one surface to another, and then again onto a third surface?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at some point, Ms. Smith, did I send you putting 135 on your, did I send you a photograph?
You did after my testing was concluded.
Okay. So that was after your testing was concluded, right?
Yes.
Okay. So after your testing was concluded, did I send you, does this look like a photograph?
It does, yes.
Okay. And assuming the blue substance in this photograph to be chewed bubble gum, do you have a reasonable opinion, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about the potential transfer of DNA from the chewed bubble gum onto the shell casing?
Yes, it is.
What is your opinion?
Because with chewing gum, and there's going to be a lot of saliva that's present on that, so there's going to be a lot of DNA. It's also an adhesive type material. Obviously, it appears adhered to this casing, so it is extremely likely that some of the saliva within that gum could transfer to that casing.
Now, you indicated that the swabbing that you tested contained, I think you said 3 extraneous alleles, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's and what does that signify, that there are 3 extraneous alleles in what you tested?
Well, that tells me that besides that major male donor, there was other DNA that was detected.
Okay. And was the amount of other DNA that was detected small or medium or large?
Well, in comparison to the major profile, it was very minute, very small.
Okay. And could you form any opinion about where that those extraneous alleles came from?
Because there were only 3 alleles that were even detected, I wouldn't be able to make any conclusions with regards to whom they may have been contributed from. But knowing that this, what appeared to be a gum-like substance, if it was in fact gum, again, is very adhesive, it's very sticky. It's possible anything else that the gum came into contact with could have picked up DNA from that type of object or surface.
And does the fact that you detected these 3 extraneous alleles on what you tested, does that change your opinion at all about who was the major contributor to the DNA in the evidence sample that you tested?
No, it did not.
And who was that?
The major male contributor was identified as being Aaron Hernandez.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. No further questions.
Well, the lunch recess.
Resume in an hour. Please keep your mind suspended. Don't discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Thank you.
All right.